It's one of the biggest questions we can ask about ourselves. Why are we here? And by here, I mean everywhere, on every continent, in every climate. How did we, a species that started on one continent, end up all over the planet? The short answer is that we walked, but the long answer, the real story, is about why we started walking in the first place. Why did humans first leave Africa? It wasn't a single decision. No one stood on a hill, pointed to the horizon, and announced a grand plan for global expansion. It wasn't an exodus or an organized migration. It was a slow, messy, and accidental drift that happened over tens of thousands of years. It was a story of climate, food, competition, and maybe a little bit of curiosity. And it didn't just happen once. It happened multiple times, with different kinds of humans, and with many false starts and dead ends. To really get it, we have to go way back. Way before our own species, Homo sapiens was even around. The first real travelers in our family tree were a group called Homo erectus. These weren't modern humans. They were taller and stronger than their ancestors, with bigger brains and a new kind of technology. They invented the stone hand axe. This might sound simple, but it was a revolutionary tool. It was a multi-purpose gadget that could butcher an animal, dig for roots, or strip bark from a tree. It gave them a reliable way to get calories, especially from meat and marrow. Around 2 million years ago, some groups of Homo erectus started to wander out of Africa. Why then? The environment was changing. Africa's climate has always fluctuated, swinging between wet periods and dry periods. During dry spells, grasslands expanded, and with the grasslands came the big grazing animals. Herds of antelope, gazelles, and ancient elephants moved across these new open landscapes. And Homo erectus, with their long legs built for walking and their new tools for butchering, followed them. They weren't trying to leave Africa, they were just following dinner. A small family group might have followed a herd into a new valley. That valley provided enough food for a generation. Then their children might have moved into the next valley over. And repeat this process for a few thousand years, and you end up in the Middle East. Repeat it for a few 100,000 more, and you're in China and Indonesia. These first pioneers were incredibly successful. They spread all across Asia. But they were tied to a certain kind of world. They were hunters and scavengers of big game on open plains. They were tough, but perhaps not as adaptable as the humans who would come later. They were the first draft of a global human, but not the final one. They set the stage. They proved it was possible for a walking ape from Africa to make a life on another continent. After Homo erectus, other waves of hominins left Africa. The ancestors of the Neanderthals, for example, moved into Europe and the Middle East hundreds of thousands of years ago. They adapted to the colder climates, becoming skilled hunters of the megafauna of the Ice Age. But again, these weren't our direct ancestors, they were our cousins. The main event, our story, starts much later. It starts with us, Homo sapiens. We evolved in Africa around 300,000 years ago. For a long time, we stayed there. We lived in small groups, hunting and gathering, just like our ancestors and our cousins. The world outside of Africa belonged to the Neanderthals and other hominins like the Denisovans in Asia. But then, something started to change. There were early attempts to leave. We have evidence of modern humans in the Middle East, in places like present-day Israel, as early as 120,000 years ago. But these forays seem to have failed. The groups either died out or retreated back into Africa. They were pushing into territory already occupied by well-adapted Neanderthals. And maybe the climate turned against them. The deserts of the Middle East expanded, cutting them off. For whatever reason, this early wave wasn't the one that stuck. It was another false start. The successful push, the one that led to you and me and everyone else outside of Africa, seems to have happened sometime between 70,000 and 60,000 years ago. So what was different this time? Why did this one work when the others failed? There isn't one simple answer. It was a mix of factors, a perfect storm of pressure, opportunity, and ability. First, let's talk about the pressure. The climate was a huge driver. Africa was going through one of its dramatic climate swings. A massive drought might have hit, making resources scarce and putting pressure on populations. Small groups might have been forced to move just to find water and food. It's the simplest reason to move the place you're in can no longer support you. There's a fascinating idea called the Sahara pump theory. The Sahara Desert isn't a permanent feature. Its size and climate have changed dramatically over millennia. Sometimes it's the vast dry desert we know today. But at other times, during wetter periods, it was a green landscape filled with rivers, lakes, and grasslands. These green Sahara periods created corridors for animals and people to move through. When the climate shifted again and the desert returned, it would pump these populations out, pushing them north into the Middle East or east towards the Nile. The migration out of Africa might have been timed to one of these pump cycles. A group could have been living in a once lush part of the Sahara, and as it turned to sand, their only option was to keep moving away from the drying land. There's also the possibility of a major catastrophe. Around 74,000 years ago, a supervolcano called Toba erupted in Indonesia. It was a world-changing event, plunging the planet into a volcanic winter that lasted for years. Some scientists believe this event caused a massive die-off of human populations, creating a bottleneck where only a few thousand individuals survived. It's possible that the group that eventually populated the world was a small, resilient band of survivors, forced out of their homes by the ecological collapse that followed the eruption. This idea is still debated, but it highlights how dramatic environmental events could have played a role. But pressure alone isn't enough. You also need opportunity and ability. The humans who left Africa 60,000 years ago were different from those who had tried and failed before. Something had changed, not just in their environment, but in their minds. This is where we get into the idea of a cognitive revolution. Sometime before this big migration, Homo sapiens seemed to have developed a new way of thinking. We see evidence of it in the archaeological record from Africa. We start seeing things that aren't just practical tools. We see beads made from shells, pieces of ochre engraved with geometric patterns, and evidence of deliberate burials with symbolic meaning. This is the start of art, of ritual, of symbolism. This wasn't just about making pretty things. It was a sign of a brain that could think abstractly. It meant we could create shared stories, myths, and beliefs. And that is a superpower. It allows you to cooperate in much larger groups. You can cooperate with strangers as long as you all believe in the same god, or the same tribe, or the same goal. A group of 150 people who can coordinate their actions based on a shared story will almost always outcompete a group of 30 people who only cooperate with close family. This new social glue might have given our ancestors the edge they needed to survive in new and challenging environments. This new way of thinking was also tied to language. While earlier humans certainly had some form of communication, the development of complex grammatical language allowed for incredibly precise planning and information sharing. You could tell someone, "Don't go over that hill." Yesterday, I saw a pride of lions there hunting near the big rock that looks like a face. That kind of information is priceless for survival. It allows you to build a collective pool of knowledge that can be passed down through generations. This cognitive shift was reflected in our technology. Our toolkit became more sophisticated and diverse. We weren't just using big, heavy hand axes anymore. We developed smaller, more refined stone blades that could be attached to spears. We created projectile weapons. The invention of the spear thrower, or atlatl, was a huge leap. It allowed a hunter to throw a spear with much more force and accuracy, and from a safer distance. It meant you could hunt more dangerous animals more successfully. We also developed new tools for processing different kinds of food, like fish hooks and possibly nets. This meant we weren't just reliant on big game. We could exploit coastal resources, rivers, and smaller animals. Our diet became broader, making us more adaptable. If one food source disappeared, we had others to fall back on. So you have this new human, a human who was under pressure from a changing climate, but who was also equipped with a new set of mental, social, and technological tools. They could plan better, cooperate in larger groups, communicate more effectively, and exploit a wider range of foods. This was the human who was ready to take on the world. So how did they do it? Where did they go? There are two main theories for the route they took. The first is the northern route. This is the most obvious one. They would have walked from northeastern Africa across the Sinai Peninsula and into the Levant, the modern-day Middle East. It was a land bridge, a direct corridor out of the continent. The second theory is the southern route. This one suggests that early humans crossed the Red Sea at its narrowest point, a strait called the Bab el-Mandeb. At the time, sea levels were much lower due to the Ice Age locking up so much water in glaciers. The gap between Africa and the Arabian Peninsula might have been only a few miles wide, possibly dotted with islands. It might have been crossable with simple rafts or even just by waiting for low tide. Once they crossed, these pioneers would have found a coastal highway. The coast of the Arabian Peninsula and all across southern Asia would have been a paradise for hunter-gatherers. The ocean provides a reliable and rich source of food: shellfish, crabs, fish, seabirds. You don't need to be a big game hunter to survive on the coast. You just need to know the tides. This theory is compelling because it helps explain the incredible speed at which humans seem to have spread. Some evidence suggests humans reached Australia by 65,000 years ago. To get there that fast, a rapid expansion along the coast makes a lot of sense. It was a predictable path with a predictable food source. You just follow the beach. In reality, it was probably both. There were likely multiple waves of migration, using different routes at different times, depending on the climate and opportunities. It wasn't a single event, but a long, drawn-out process of expansion. But when our ancestors left Africa, they found that they were not alone. The world was already populated by other kinds of humans. In Europe and the Middle East, they met the Neanderthals. In Asia, they met the Denisovans and perhaps the last remnants of Homo erectus. What happened next is one of the most debated parts of our story. For a long time, the thinking was that we simply replaced them. The story was that the smart, adaptable Homo sapiens arrived and quickly outcompeted their brutish, less intelligent cousins, driving them to extinction. But the real story, as revealed by genetics, is far more interesting and complicated. We have the Neanderthal genome, and when we compare it to our own, we find that all non-African people today have a small amount of Neanderthal DNA in them, typically around 1 to 2%. What does that mean? It means we didn't just replace them. We interbred with them. At some point, probably in the Middle East, shortly after leaving Africa, our ancestors met Neanderthals and had children with them. Those children, and their descendants, carried those Neanderthal genes with them as they spread across the globe. It's a stunning revelation. We carry a genetic echo of these other humans within us. The same is true for Denisovans. Many people in Asia, and especially in Melanesia and Aboriginal Australia, carry Denisovan DNA. So the story wasn't one of simple conquest. It was a story of interaction. Sometimes that interaction might have been violent competition. Other times it was cooperation, or at least coexistence, and sometimes it was love, or at least sex. So why did we survive and they didn't? If we were close enough to have children together, why are we the only ones left? Again, there's no single reason. It was likely a combination of advantages that added up over time. Our social groups were probably larger and more complex, giving us a safety net and a competitive edge. Our technology, especially projectile weapons, might have been more efficient for hunting and for defense. Our more varied diet might have made us more resilient when certain food sources became scarce. It's also possible we were just better at adapting to rapidly changing climates. The last ice age was a time of intense environmental instability. Our cognitive flexibility, the ability to innovate and share new solutions quickly, might have been our trump card. While Neanderthals were superbly adapted to a specific kind of ice age European environment, we were the generalists. We were the supreme adapters. And in a world of constant change, the adapter wins. And so we spread. From the Middle East, some groups turned west into Europe. Others continued east across Asia. They followed coasts, they followed rivers, they followed herds of animals. They developed new technologies to deal with new challenges, tailored clothing to survive the cold, boats to cross rivers, and eventually open water to reach Australia and the islands of the Pacific. They moved into Siberia, adapting to one of the harshest environments on Earth. And from there, sometime around 20,000 years ago, they crossed the Bering Land Bridge into the Americas, the last great continental conquest. Within a few tens of thousands of years, a blink of an eye in evolutionary time, our species had gone from a small population in a corner of Africa to a global presence. So, why did we first leave Africa? We left because the climate pushed us out. We left because we were following our food, but we were only able to leave and to succeed because we had become a new kind of animal. We had developed the power of symbolic thought, the magic of complex language, and the strength of large-scale cooperation. We weren't necessarily stronger or tougher than the other humans we met, but we were more flexible. We were more connected. We could learn and adapt faster. It was a journey driven by the most basic of needs: to find food, to find water, to find a safe place for your family. There was no destination in mind. There was only the next step, the next valley, the next coastline. It was an accidental colonization of the planet, a slow drift powered by necessity and made possible by a revolutionary new mind. Every single person on Earth today is a descendant of those African travelers. Their long, uncertain journey is the reason we are here.